The hiss came first, sharp and wet, like steam escaping a radiator that hadn't been bled in decades. It didn't just cut through the low hum of the Metropolitan Club's grand foyer. It sliced through it, through the clinking of crystal flutes filled with vintage champagne, through the polite, performative laughter of people who had never had to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. The sound was intimate in its malice, a sound that belonged in a back alley, not a ballroom where the waiters wore white gloves and the chandeliers cost more than my first CAR. I was standing by table 12, the one with the small, tasteful gold plaque that read VIP, Sterling, Pennsylvania, RTY. My fingers hovered an inch above the back of the empty chair. My chair, according to the engraved name CARD sitting SQUA in the center of the place setting. Recipient: Eleanor Vance. The CARD was printed on heavy stock paper with a raised font. It was beautiful. It was also a lie. Before I could sit, Victoria materialized. She didn't walk up like a normal person navigating a crowded room. She glided, the way women do when they've spent their entire lives being photographed in couture gowns that cost more than most people's annual salaries. She leaned in close enough that I caught the sharp edge of her minty breath and the faint chemical sweetness of whatever serum she used to keep her Botoxed forehead unnaturally smooth. Her lips barely moved, preserving her social smile for the room at large while her words were meant only for me. "Avoid our VIP table," she whispered. Not a request. Not even a warning. A command, delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who has never been told no by anyone who matters. "You are not worthy enough to be seen with us tonight. Go sit with the caterers or the drivers. Do not embarrass us during the photos." Her voice was low, but its ride the kind of venom that doesn't need volume to land. I felt it in my throat, a physical tightening, and in my chest, a dull thudding where my heart used to beat with pride for my son. I looked past her, Tawa RD, the champagne fountain where David, my only child, was hovering. He was pretending to study the bubbles as they cascaded from one crystal tear to the next, his jaw tight, his gaze fixed on his Italian leather shoes. He was choosing silence again. He had become so good at that lately. I didn't answer her. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I had learned long ago that TRS a reoccurrency the powerful don't respect. Instead, I straightened the cuff of my thrifted black dress, a wool blend, tailored to fit my aging frame perfectly, bought secondhand on Roosevelt Avenue for $60 RS and altered by a seamstress in my building. It was more honest than the gowns around me. I turned away from the table, away from the plaque, away from the name CARD that bore my name, but not my presence. I walked past the velvet rope, past the maitre d', who suddenly found a seating RT the most fascinating document he'd ever seen, and down the repeated hallway that led to the service corridors. The hallway smelled like old wood polish and the faint metallic tang of heating vents. At the end of it, a pair of swinging stainless steel doors led into the kitchen. I pushed one open and stepped into the noise, the heat, the reality. This was the RT of the club most guests never saw. The hum of the industrial dishwasher was a constant, thunderous ROAR. The clang of pans hitting the fire suppression system. The rhythmic, percussive chop of knives on cutting boa RDS. The air was thick with steam, garlic, and the rich, iron scent of RA re-roast beef. It was chaotic and it was real. Marco, the head chef, spotted me immediately. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with 4 arms like cured hams and a tattoo of the Virgin peeking out from under his rolled-up sleeves. He wiped his hands on his apron, leaving streaks of flour, and frowned at me. "Dr. Vance," he said, his voice a gravelly baritone that somehow ride over the kitchen din. "They got you back here?" I shrugged, the movement small. "Seems I'm not VIP material." He grunted, a sound of pure disgust, and handed me a plate of canapés without asking if I wanted them. Smoked salmon on rye crisps, tiny dots of caviar, microgreens arranged like edible architecture. "Eat," he ordered, his accent thick with Queensborough. "You look like you haven't slept since the last time I saw you. Don't let those Basta RDS win before the night, even STARTS." I ate. The salmon was buttery. The caviar popped against my tongue with a salty burst. It tasted better than anything I'd ever been served in a boa rudrum or a faculty lounge. It tasted like work, like honesty. From the ballroom, the master of ceremonies' voice boomed through the overhead speakers, muffled but clear. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the National Humanities Gala. I closed my eyes. I could still feel Victoria's hiss against my ear, the condensation of her contempt. Not worthy. The words looped in my head like a scratched record, a mantra of degradation designed to stick. But here's the thing about being told you're not worthy. It only works if you believe it. And I had spent 40 years teaching college students, first-generation kids, immigrants, working-class Sholes. That worth isn't something you're given by a committee or a wealthy spouse. It's something you build, brick by painful brick. I had built mine in classrooms that were too cold in the winter and too hot in the spring. I had built it in public libraries and cramped appartements. I had built it on the backs of the stories I had collected from people who had even less than I did. I looked down at my hands. They were older now, spotted with sun damage from years of walking city streets for research, the knuckles slightly swollen from too many winters grading papers in drafty offices. But they were steady. They had written a book that had fundamentally changed how sociologists understood urban poverty. They had held my son when he was a baby and had a fever of 104 degrees. They had signed the NDA Victoria's lawyers drafted, the one that legally silenced me in exchange for David's peace of mind. I hated that NDA. I hated what it represented. But I also understood it. Fear makes people do ugly things. Victoria fear red exposure. David fear red loss. Richa Rhodes Sterling, Victoria's father and my son's benefactor, fear red irrelevance. Me. I fear red nothing anymore. Not at 67. Not after surviving a husband's EARLY death, a 10-year denial, and the slow, heart-breaking transformation of my son into a kept man. I finished the canopy and set the plate on a stack of gray bus tubs. RCO tossed me a bottle of sparkling water, the cheap stuff in green plastic bottles, not the imported glass bottles with gold foil on the VIP tables. I twisted the cap off and drank deeply, the cold liquid stinging my throat. You gonna go back out there? RCO asked, flipping a scallop with a practiced flick of his wrist. I looked at the swinging doors. Somewhere beyond them, Victoria was preparing to accept an RD that had my fingerprints all over it. My research, my interviews, my late nights in Bronx housing projects, my notes, transcribed and sanitized and repackaged as the Sterling Initiative data. Yeah, I said quietly, the word feeling like a stone in my mouth. I'm going back. Good. RCO said, not looking up from his station. Someone needs to remind them what real work looks like. Someone needs to show them that the help isn't just the people Cleo ring their plates. I tucked the water bottle into my purse, a simple black leather bag I'd owned for 15 years, and adjusted my dress one more time. The fabric was smooth under my fingers. It was a mirror. I pushed the door open and stepped back into the foyer. The chandelier above table 12 threw prisms across the marbly floor. The gold plaque gleamed under the light. The name CARDSTA read back at me. Eleanor Vance. Tonight, I would decide what that name meant. Tonight, I would stop being a ghost in my own story. 6 months earlier, I was sitting in my living room in a nondescript APA rement complex in Rego, PA, Queens. The building was beige. The hallways smelled faintly of curry and old CA pet cleaner, and my 2-bedroom unit was small enough that you could stand in the center and touch both walls if you stretched your arms out. But it was mine, paid for by decades of adjunct teaching and a modest pension that required CA refill budgeting. I was balancing a cup of RL Grey on my knee. The tea was weak. I was rationing the good leaves. On the coffee table in front of me sat a legal document, 12 pages long, printed in tiny, dense font. It was the NDA, the non-disclosure agreement, Victoria's lawyers had sent over. David was sitting on the sofa opposite me. The cushion was worn, the springs poking through just enough to be annoying. He shifted every few minutes, trying to find a comfortable position that didn't exist. He looked exhausted. There were shadows under his eyes that no amount of expensive concealer or sleep could hide. His suit was new, navy blue, slim cut, the kind of thing that costs more than my monthly Social Security check. He looked like a man playing dress-up in his father's clothes, even though they were tailored for him. "Mom," he said finally, his voice tight, stretched thin over a bedrock of anxiety. "Just play along." I set my teacup down on the side table. The ceramic clinked against the coaster, a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet appartement. Play along with what, exactly? With Victoria. With the gala. With the Hour Road. He ran a hand through his hair. It was longer now, styled with product that made it look effortlessly messy, like he'd just rolled out of bed in a penthouse. "Just let her have the spotlight. If you fight her, she'll divorce me. I can't lose the lifestyle, the connections. I need you to be small tonight, so I can stay big." Small. He said it like it was a reasonable request. Like shrinking myself, my legacy, and my life's work was a minor favor I owed him. Like I was a sweater that needed to be folded and put in a drawer. I studied him. He wasn't a cruel man. He wasn't even a selfish one. Not in the traditional sense. He was a man who had been hollowed out by comfort. He had Ma ride into a world where money wasn't just currency, it was oxygen. And he had forgotten how to breathe without it. He had forgotten the smell of the subway, the weight of student loans, the pride of earning something through sheer effort. "Do you know what that Awa RD is for?" I asked, my voice calm, devoid of the anger that was simmering beneath the surface. He hesitated, his eyes rooting to the NDA. "It's for the Sterling Initiative. The RCH project." "It's for my book," I said, the words precise. "The one I spent 8 years writing. The one your father-in-law's firm sponsored, by paying me a consulting fee that amounted to a buyout of my public credit. The one that required me to live in a Bronx shelter for 3 months to get the data right." David looked away. He couldn't meet my eyes. "That's not fair." "Fair." I laughed softly, a dry, humorless sound. "Fair is teaching 3 classes a semester while raising a kid on adjunct wages because your husband died and the life insurance didn't cover the mortgage. Fair is turning down speaking fees because you don't want to harass your son's new wife. You want to talk about fair? Let's talk about the fact that I haven't seen my name in print in 2 years because of that consulting agreement." He didn't answer. He just read at the CA pet, at the faded pattern of leaves and vines. I remembered buying that rug at a RD sale in Astoria for $20 when David was 5. He used to lie on it, coloring in his notebooks with broken crayons while I graded papers late into the night. He would tell me stories about the pictures he drew, stories that were more creative than half the novels published today. "I'm not asking you to lie," I said after a long silence, breaking the tension. "I'm asking you to understand what you're asking me to give up." "I understand," he said quietly, his voice cracking.
"Ida."
"But Mom, I'm SCA red." There it was. The truth. Not greed. Not arrogance. Fear are raw, visceral fear are that Victoria would leave him, that Richa Road Sterling would cut him off, that he'd have to go back to being ordinary.
To being nobody.
I sighed, a sound of profound weariness.
Fin.
His head snapped up, hope flickering in his eyes like a dying bulb.
Fin.
"I'll stay quiet. I won't make a scene. I'll let her accept the Hour Road." I paused, leaning 4-way road, "But you sign the NDA yourself." "I'm not signing another document that legally erases me from my own work." He nodded quickly, relief washing over his face like a wave. "Thank you."
"Thank you, Mom."
"I promise, this is just temporary. Once the gala is over, we can—" "Don't," I said sharply, cutting him off. "Don't promise me things you can't keep. Don't tell me this is temporary when we both know it's a permanent surrender." He left an hour later, taking the unsigned NDA with him. After he was gone, I sat at my desk, a small, battered thing shoved into the corner of my bedroom, and opened my laptop. The email from Victoria's lawyer was waiting. I scrolled through the document again. It prohibited me from discussing the RCH, the Awa RD, or my relationship with the Sterling family. Violation CA write a penalty of $250,000. A qua-rooter of $1 million RS. That was more money than I had ever seen in my life. I scrolled to the bottom and typed my name. The cursor blinked. I hovered over the signature box for a full minute, my finger trembling over the trackpad. Then I clicked. The sound of the send button was soft. Too soft for something that felt like a death. I leaned back in my chair and looked around the apartment. The bookshelves were sagging under the weight of decades of scholarship. My thesis from Columbia. My dissertation on urban displacement. The dozens of articles I'd published in peer-reviewed journals. All of it reduced to a consulting fee and a gag order. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. Somewhere in a penthouse on Fifth Avenue, David was probably celebrating. Victoria was probably already picking out her gown for the gala, something that screamed wealth and demanded attention. Richard Rhodes Sterling was probably drafting his speech about philanthropy and vision, using words like synergy and impact to describe work he'd never done. And me. I was sitting in the dark, drinking Luque RMT, wondering when my son had become a stranger. Wondering when I had lost him to a world that valued a gold plaque over a human soul. My home office was the size of a walk-in closet, but it was mine. Every inch of wall space was lined with books. Sociology, anthropology, economics, history. The spines were cracked, the pages dog-eared, the margins filled with my frantic scrawls. These weren't decorative books. They were tools. They were the scaffolding of my CA rear. On my desk sat a single lamp, its shade tilted at an angle that cast a pool of yellow light over my work. The rest of the room was swallowed in shadow. It was 2 a.m. I hadn't slept properly in weeks. I was rereading the final proofs of the Sterling Initiative, Urban Renewal and Social Capital. The cover was sleek, matte black with silver lettering that shimmered under the lamplight. It looked important. It looked authoritative. Inside, the acknowledgments spanned 2 pages. Richard Rhodes Sterling's name Ape read 7 times. Victoria's Ape read 4. My name didn't appear at all. I was mentioned once, in a footnote, as Evance consultant. I flipped to page 112. My own words St. read back at me, slightly rewritten, stripped of the raw, unfiltered interviews I had conducted in the South Bronx. The original sentence from my manuscript had read, Mrs. Ramirez, a 62-year-old grandmother of 4 who had lived in the Mott Haven projects her entire life, described the eviction process as a slow bleeding out. She said, "They don't just take your home. They take your story." The Sterling version read, Survey respondents reported negative sentiment writing relocation procedures, citing emotional distress as a secondary factor in housing instability. They had scrubbed the humanity out of it, replaced voices with data points, replaced pain with percentages. They had turned my life's work into a PowerPoint presentation. I closed the book with a soft thud and opened the top drawer of my desk. Inside was a manila folder labeled Original Manuscript in my neat, precise handwriting. I pulled it out and spread the pages across the desk. 312 pages of single-space text, footnotes, appendices, transcripts of interviews with 74 families, photographs I had taken with permission of the conditions they lived in. This was the real book, the one I had written before the sponsorship, the one that named names, told stories, and didn't apologize for the messiness of poverty. My phone buzzed on the desk, vibrating against the wood. A text from David. Mom, Victoria wants to approve your outfit for the gala. Send pics. She says the black dress might be too institutional. Institutional. He actually used that word. As if my thrifted dress was a uniform for the poor. I read at the screen until the backlight timed out. Then I picked up the manuscript and turned to the dedication page. It read, For David, who once believed stories mattered. I remembered the day he wrote his first short story. He was 8 years old. It was about a boy who lived in a CA Redboe road box but had a Libra in his imagination. He illustrated it himself, drawing shelves filled with books that had titles like The Adventures of the Sidewalk and How to Talk to Pigeons. I had typed it up for him and submitted it to a children's writing contest. He didn't win, but he cried when I read it back to him. Not sad TRS, proud ones. He had felt like a real author. Where had that boy gone? My laptop chimed. An email from Professor Alistair Green, my former colleague at NYU. We had taught together for 20 years before I retired. Subject line: They're erasing you. I opened it. Eleanor, I just received the advance copy of the Sterling book.
I'm appalled.
Your name isn't anywhere. Not in the credits, not in the footnotes, not even in the bibliography. They've taken your life's work and hung it on their wall like a trophy. The sections on displacement, those were your fieldwork. The policy recommendations, those were your conclusions. I know you signed an NDA, but this is academic theft.
You need to fight this.
You need to stand up before they rewrite history entirely. I leaned back in my chair, the worn leather creaking. Alistair was right. But fighting meant burning bridges. Fighting meant David losing everything. His APA meant his CAR, his social standing. Fighting meant becoming the villain in my son's story, the bitter old woman who ruined his life because she couldn't let go of her pride. I typed a reply, my fingers moving slowly over the keys. Alistair, thank you. But some battles aren't worth the casualties. I've already paid the price. Let them have the book. I still have the truth. I hit send before I could change my mind. Outside, a siren wailed down Queen's Bellevue Road, its scream fading into the distance. I looked at the manuscript again. I couldn't publish it. Not while the NDA was active. Not while David's future hung in the balance. But I could keep it. I could hold it. I could remember. I opened my purse, the same black bag from the gala, and pulled out the printed copy of my acceptance speech. Victoria's team had pre-approved it and heavily edited it down to 3 paragraphs. It was polite, grateful, empty. It thanked the Sterling family for their visionary re-leadership and made no mention of the actual RCH. I placed it next to the manuscript. 2 versions of the same night. One built on lies. One built on truth. I didn't know which one I would deliver. But for the first time in months, I felt something shift. A tightness in my chest loosened. A CLA righty settled in my bones. Worthiness wasn't about a table. It wasn't about an hour road. It wasn't about who sat where or who wore what. Worthiness was about truth. And I had spent 67 years collecting mine. I folded the acceptance speech and tucked it back into my purse. Then I turned off the lamp and sat in the dark, the manuscript glowing faintly in the spill of light from the street lamp outside. In the silence, I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Tomorrow I would go to the gala. Tomorrow I would sit where they told me to sit. Tomorrow I would smile for the cameras. But tonight I was still Eleanor Vance. And no NDA, no gold plaque, and no hissing daughter-in-law could take that away. The service corridor behind the Metropolitan Club was a different world. Gone were the Persian rugs and the gilded mirrors. In their place were concrete floors stained with grease and the smell of industrial bleach. I walked past stacks of empty crates, past pallets of bottled water, and past a group of busboys smoking cigarettes by the our loading dock. They glanced at me, but none of them said a word. They were used to seeing people like me, people who didn't belong in the front of the house, slipping through the cracks. I found a spot the dish pit, where the heat was unba rabble and the steam from the machines fogged up my glasses. I took them off and wiped them on the hem of my dress. Marco saw me and tossed a clean towel in my direction. Dry off, he said. You look like you're about to pass out. I caught the towel and did as he said. My hands were shaking. But not from the cold. From the adrenaline. From the sheer audacity of what I was about to do. You don't have to do this, Doc. Marco said, his voice lower now. We can sneak you out the back. No one would blame you for walking away. I looked at him. Really looked at him. His face was flushed from the heat, his brow slick with sweat. He was a man who worked 16-hour days to send his daughter to college. He was a man who knew what it meant to be invisible. I do have to do this,
I said.
Because if I don't, they win. And I've spent my whole life studying how they win. I'm not going to let them win in my own story. Marco nodded slowly. He understood. He didn't agree, but he understood. He reached into a seagull lure and pulled out a plastic container of cold pasta. Eat this, too. You'll need the strength. And keep the bottle of water. You're going to need that, too. I ate the pasta with my fingers, standing in the middle of the chaos. It was bland, slightly oversealed, and absolutely perfect. It was food made by hands, not by robots or private chefs. It was food that fueled the machine that kept the VIPs in their gilded chairs. I finished the container and tossed it into the recycling bin. I took a long drink of the water. My throat felt raw, but my head was clear. Through the swinging doors, I could hear the master of ceremonies introducing the evening's honorees. I could hear the polite applause, the rustle of programs, the clinking of silverware. They were rooting. Victoria was probably at the table by now, basking in the glow of her stolen spotlight. David was probably sitting beside her, his posture stiff, his smile frozen in place. I thought about the NDA. I thought about the $250,000 penalty. I thought about the fear that had kept me silent for 6 months. And then I thought about Mrs. Ramirez, the grandmother from the Bronx. I thought about her voice, her story, her bleeding out. I thought about the fact that she would never see her name in the Sterling book. But she would see it tonight, if I had anything to say about it. I straightened my shoulders. I smoothed my hair. I looked down at my thrifted dress. It was wrinkled now, stained with a drop of pasta sauce. But it was real. I was real. And they were about to find out just how real I was. I pushed the swinging door open just enough to peek into the ballroom. The lights were dimmed. The focus was on the stage. Richard Sterling was at the podium, adjusting the microphone. He looked every inch the patriarch, silver-haired, tanned, confident. He looked like a man who had never been told no. I waited until he began to speak. I waited until the room was completely silent, hanging on his every word. And then I stepped out of the shadows. I didn't run. I didn't rush. I walked. My heels clicked against the marbly floor, a sound that root soft but grew louder with every step. Heads turned. Whispers root. Victoria's head snapped up. Her eyes widened in horror. David went pale. Richard Sterling paused mid-sentence, his eyes narrowing as he tried to place me. I kept walking. I walked past the tables of donors and philanthropists. I walked past the journalists taking notes. I walked past the servers frozen in place. I walked until I was standing at the foot of the stage, looking up at the man who had bought my silence. "Excuse me," I said, my voice rang clear in the sudden silence. "I believe you're holding something that belongs to me." The room held its breath. I had their attention. Now, I just had to make sure they never forgot what I was about to say. Richard Sterling recovered quickly. He was a hedge fund manager after all. He was trained to handle volatility. He smiled, a thin, practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes, and gestured vaguely in my direction. It seems we have a guest who's wandered in from the reception," he said smoothly, his voice amplified by the microphone. "Security will be with you shortly, madam. Please, enjoy the evening from the lobby." The crowd chuckled nervously. They thought it was a mistake. A mix-up. They wanted it to be a mix-up. I didn't move. I just looked up at him, my hands clasped in front of me. "I'm not lost, Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice steady. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I'm here for the Hour Road. The one that RS my name." His smile faltered. Victoria stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Mother, sit down," she hissed. "You're harassing yourself. You're harassing us." I ignored her. I kept my eyes on Richard. "You were saying, Mr. Sterling? About the Sterling Initiative? About the vision that revolutionized our understanding of urban renewal?" I quoted directly from the program notes. "Please continue. I'd love to hear how you describe work you've never done. Work you've never even read." Richard's jaw tightened. He leaned closer to the microphone. "Eleanor, This is neither the time nor the place. We discussed this. You signed an agreement. I signed a gag order. I corrected him. I signed a document that traded my silence for my son's comfort. But I didn't sign away the truth. And I certainly didn't sign away my name. I reached into my purse and pulled out the original manuscript. I held it up so the NEA rest tables could see the title page. Urban Displacement and the Erosion of Social Capital, a Grounded Theory Approach. My name was on it.
Large.
Unmistakable. A murmur rippled through the crowd. People were leaning four-way RD now, their phones out, recording. The journalists had stopped taking notes and were filming. This, I said, holding the manuscript higher, is the book you're receiving an hour RD for tonight. Every interview, every case study, every policy recommendation in that book came from these pages. From my pages. I lived in those shelters. I interviewed those families. I held their hands while they cried. And you took that work, you scrubbed their names, and you put your own on the cover. Richa Road tried to interrupt, but I was louder. You talk about philanthropic vision, but your vision is blurred by your own reflection. You didn't fund this RC. You didn't facilitate it. You bought it. You bought me. And then you told my son that if he didn't keep me quiet, you'd take away his trust fund, his APA meant his life. I turned to David. He was STA ring at the table, his face buried in his hands. David, I said, my voice softening just a fraction. Look at me. He didn't move. David, I taught you to read with that book. I taught you that words have power. And tonight, you're letting them use your silence to erase mine. He flinched. Victoria reached for his ARM, but he pulled away.
Slowly, he looked up.
His eyes were red, his face streaked with TRS. He looked like the boy I'd raised. He looked broken. I'm sorry, he whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. I'm so sorry, Mom. Richa Road Sterling slammed his hand on the podium. That's enough, he bearcad. Security. Remove her now. Two men in black suits estit Arut Tawa RD me. I didn't run. I didn't resist. I simply held up the manuscript one more time. You can remove me, I said. But you can't remove the truth. It's in the pages. It's in the interviews. It's in the RTS of the people you've spent your life ignoring. And tonight, everyone in this room is going to know exactly who wrote it. The security Gua RDS hesitated. They looked at Richa Road. They looked at the crowd. They looked at me. I wasn't a threat. I was a fact. And facts a harder to remove than people. Richa Road Sterling realized it too. He realized that the more he tried to silence me, the louder I became. He raised a hand, stopping the Gua RDS. He forced another smile, this one even more strained than the last. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice tight, it seems we have a misunderstanding. Dr. Vance is a valued consultant. We are, of course, grateful for her contributions. It was a lie, a pathetic, transparent lie, but it was the best he could do. I lowered the manuscript. I looked at Victoria. She was shaking with rage. I looked at David. He was shaking with shame. And then I looked at Richa Road. Save it. I said. Your gratitude is worth less than the paper your awa RD is printed on. I turned and walked back the way I had come. The clicks of my heels echoed in the silence. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew what I had done. I had broken the silence. I had shattered the illusion. And the VIP table would never look the same again. I didn't go back to the kitchen. I didn't go to the lobby. I walked out of the ballroom and into the grand foyer, where the chandeliers still glittered and the waiters were still circulating with trays of champagne. They STA read at me as I passed, their expressions a mixture of shock and awe. I must have looked like a ghost, disheveled, determined, radiating a quiet fury that didn't need to shout to be heroed. I walked straight to table 12, the VIP table, the Sterling, Pennsylvania Rudy's table. The name CARD was still there. Recipient, Eleanor Vance. I picked it up. I held it in my hand for a moment, feeling the weight of the heavy stock. Then I placed it face down on the table. I didn't want to see my name associated with that chair anymore. I walked around the table and sat down in the empty seat. My seat. I crossed my legs and rested my hands in my lap. I looked out at the NEA RLY empty foyer. A few guests had followed me out, curious, maybe even sympathetic. They stood at a distance, whispering, but they didn't approach. I was a spectacle, but I was also a force field. Our CO emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. He looked at me, sitting alone at the VIP table, and a slow smile spread across his face. He gave me a thumbs up. I returned it. Then I looked down at the program booklet someone had left on the table. I opened it to the page listing the AWA RD recipients. There it was, the National Humanities Medal, AWA Ride to the Sterling Initiative for Excellence in Urban Research. Below that, a photo of Victoria and Richa Road, smiling, shaking hands with the committee chair. I traced my finger over Victoria's face. She looked so proud, so entitled, so utterly unaware of the foundation of lies she was standing on. RD footsteps approaching. I didn't look up. I knew who it was. David stood beside the table, his hands trembling. He didn't sit. He just stood there, STA ring at me. Mom, he said again.
His voice was Hoa RSE.
Please come home with me. Let's just go. We can figure this out. I finally looked up at him. He looked smaller than I remembered. The expensive suit, the styled hair, the confidence, it was all gone. He was just a man who had made a terrible mistake. There's nothing to figure out, David, I said quietly. You made your choice. You chose them. You chose their money over my name. You chose their silence over my truth. I was SCA Red, he whispered. I'm still SCA Red. I know, I said. And I did. Fear was a powerful motivator. It had motivated him to lie. It had motivated him to beg me to stay silent. But it wouldn't motivate me anymore. I'm not going home with you, David, I said. I'm going back to my APA. I'm going to finish my book. The real one. The one without the sterling name on it. The one that tells the truth. But the NDA? The NDA is a piece of paper, I interrupted. It can't stop me from writing. It can't stop me from speaking. It can only stop me from profiting. And I've never written for profit. I've written for the people who don't have a voice. And tonight I gave them one. He sank into the chair across from me, burying his face in his hands again. He was crying openly now, his shoulders shaking. I watched him for a long moment. My son.
My boy.
The one who used to draw pictures of Libra Rise in CA Rodboe road boxes. I felt a pang of sadness, but it was quickly replaced by resolve. I couldn't save him. He had to save himself. I stood up. I smoothed my dress one last time. I looked at the overturned name CA Road. I looked at David. And then I walked away. I didn't go to the kitchen. I didn't go to the lobby. I walked straight out the front doors of the Metropolitan Club. The doorman held the door open for me, his expression neutral. I stepped out into the CL night air. The city was alive around me. The traffic, the sirens, the distant hum of millions of people living their lives. It was a stark contrast to the suffocating silence of the gala. I walked to the curb and hailed a cab. One pulled over immediately. I got in, gave the driver my address in Queens, and leaned back against the seat. As we pulled away from the club, I looked back at the building. It was beautiful, imposing, a symbol of wealth and power.
But it looked smaller now.
Diminished. I looked down at my hands. They were still shaking, but they were also steady. I had done it. I had faced the VIP table. I had faced the hiss. And I had walked away with my head held high. The cab merged into traffic. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The air smelled like exhaust and rain. It smelled like freedom. I was going home. And for the first time in 6 months, I was going home to myself. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed. The sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, casting a pale glow on the familiar walls. My APA was quiet, save for the ticking of the old clock in the living room. I lay there for a long time, STA ring at the ceiling, letting the reality of the previous night settle over me. It didn't feel like a dream. It felt like a reckoning. I got up and made a pot of strong black coffee. I didn't bother with the weak tea anymore. Today, I needed the real thing. I poured a mug, and CA right it to my desk. The manuscript was still there, spread across the surface, just as I had left it. I sat down and opened my laptop. I didn't check my email. I didn't check the news. I went straight to the folder labeled The Real Book. I opened the first chapter, and STA root reading. The words were mine. Raw, unfiltered, unedited by corporate lawyers or ambitious in-laws. They were the words of a woman who had spent her life listening to the voices of the marginalized, the ignored, the displaced. And they were good. Better than good. They were necessary. I spent the morning editing. I deleted the sanitized language. I restored the names of the interviewees. I added the photographs. I rewrote the dedication for the residents of Mott Haven, who taught me that home is not a building but a story. By noon, I was hungry. I made a peanut butter sandwich and ate it standing in the kitchen, looking out the window at the street below. The world was going on as usual. People were walking their dogs, rushing to work, arguing on their phones. They had no idea that a revolution had STA root in a ballroom across town.
My phone rang.
I ignored it. It was David. I knew it was. He had called 3 times already. I wasn't ready to talk to him. Maybe I never would be. I finished my sandwich and went back to the desk. I worked through the afternoon, fueled by coffee and a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The manuscript grew. The truth grew. Around 4 p.m., there was a knock on my door. I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. It was Marco. He was holding a brown paper bag and a 6-pack of cheap beer. I opened the door. "Doc," he said, holding up the bag. "Figured you could use some real food. And maybe a drink." I stepped aside and let him in. He walked straight to the kitchen and STA root unpacking the bag. Pasta, sauce, bread, salad. "Sit," he ordered. "I'll see okay." I sat at the small kitchen table and watched him move around my kitchen with practiced ease. He heated the sauce, boiled the pasta, tossed the salad. Within 20 minutes, we were eating at my tiny table, the plates heaping with food. "So," he said, twirling pasta on his fork. "How does it feel?" "How does what feel?" "Being a legend," he said, grinning. "The whole city is talking about it. It's on the news. It's all over social media. The ghostwriter who ROA read. That's what they're calling you." I put down my fork. "I'm not a legend, Marco. I'm just a woman who got tired of being invisible." "Same thing," he said, shrugging. "You did what none of us have the guts to do. You stood up to the Sterlings. You made them look like the frauds they are." He pulled out his phone and showed me a video. It was footage from the gala. My voice was clear, my words precise. The camera panned to Richard Rhodes Sterling's face, his smile frozen in a mask of fury. The comment section was exploding. "She's a hero. About time someone called him out. That's academic theft. Who is she?" I watched for a few minutes, then handed the phone back. "It doesn't matter what they say," I said. "What matters is the book. The real book. It matters," Marco insisted. "It matters because now people are re-listening. They're asking questions. The university is launching an investigation. The publisher is reviewing the contract. The Sterlings are in damage control mode." I felt a flicker of satisfaction. Not because I wanted to hurt them, but because the truth was finally seeing the light of day. "I'm not done yet," I said. "I still have to publish it." "You will," Marco said confidently. "And when you do, I'll be the first in line to buy a copy." We finished the meal in silence. After we rode, Marco helped me clean up. He didn't stay long. He had to get back to the club. "Keep your head down," he said as he left. "But don't stop writing." I nodded. After he was gone, I went back to my desk. I opened the manuscript and kept working. The sun set, and the APA rement grew to RK. I turned on the lamp and kept going. I wrote until my fingers ached and my eyes burned. I wrote until the story was told. And when I finally closed the laptop, the weight on my chest was gone. I was free, and the truth was finally, irrevocably mine. The following week was a blur of activity. The story of the gala had exploded. It wasn't just a local news item. It was a national conversation. Academics, Journalists and activists weighed in. The term academic ghostwriting trended on Twitter for 3 days. Petitions circulated demanding the revocation of the Sterling Initiative's Our Road. The university where Richa Rhodes Sterling sat on the BOA RD announced an independent review of the Rasay RC. I stayed in my apartment, working on the manuscript, avoiding the phone, and ignoring the reporters who camped out across the street. MARCO brought me groceries and updates. He told me that Victoria had been dropped from several Charity BOA RDS. Richa Rhodes Sterling's hedge fund was facing investor withdrawals. And David had moved out of the penthouse. He was staying in a hotel downtown, according to MARCO. He hadn't contacted me again.
I wasn't surprised. I had said what needed to be said.
The rest was up to him. On Friday afternoon, there was another knock on my door. This time, I looked through the peephole and saw David. He looked different. He was wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt.
No suit.
No styling product. Just a man who looked like he hadn't slept in days. I opened the door. He stood there, shifting his weight from one foot to the other.
"Mom," he said.
His voice was rough. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. He walked in, looking around the apartment with a strange expression. It was the first time he had been in my home in over a year. He looked at the bookshelves, the worn furniture, the photos on the walls. He looked at the desk, covered in manuscripts and notes. "It's small," he said quietly. "It's enough," I replied. He sat on the sofa, the same one with the poking springs.
He winced.
"I'm sorry," he said again. "I've said that a lot, haven't I?" "Yes," I said. "You have." "I don't know how to fix it," he admitted. "I don't think you can," I said. "Some things can't be fixed. They can only be acknowledged." He nodded, STA ring at his hands. "I left her," he said.
"Victoria."
I moved out. I told her I couldn't live with a lie anymore. I didn't respond. I waited for him to say more. "I lost everything," he continued. "The apartment, the CAR, the allowance. I'm staying in a hotel with a per diem limit. I had to sell my watch to pay for dinner last night. And how does that feel?" I asked. "It feels real," he said. "For the first time in years, it feels real. I miss the comfort, but I don't miss the suffocation. I don't miss being a ghost." I walked to the kitchen and poured him a glass of water. I handed it to him. He drank it down in one gulp. "I read your manuscript," he said, setting the glass on the coffee table. "The real one." MARCO gave me a copy. "I read it all last night. And it's brilliant," he said. "It's angry and sad and true. It's everything the Sterling book wasn't. And it's yours. Every word." He looked up at me, his eyes red. "I want to help you publish it. I have some contacts. I know people in independent publishing. I can—" "No," I said firmly. "I don't need your help, David. I need you to understand why you stayed silent for so long. I need you to understand what you lost when you chose them over me." "I do understand," he said. "I'm STA rooting too.
But I need to do something.
I need to make amends." "Amends aren't about actions," I said.
They're about change.
If you've changed, prove it. Live a life that doesn't require you to silence the people you love."
He was quiet for a long time.
Then he stood up. "Okay," he said. "I will. I'll prove it." He walked to the door. He paused, his hand on the knob. "I'm sorry I called your dress institutional," he said, his voice barely audible. "It was the only honest thing you wore in that entire place." I didn't reply. He opened the door and left. I listened to his footsteps on the stairs, growing fainter until they disappeared. I walked back to my desk and sat down. I opened the manuscript. I read the dedication again. For David, who once believed stories mattered. I crossed out once. I replaced it with still. For David, who still believes stories matter. It was a small change, but it was a START. I went back to writing. The apartment was quiet. The clock ticked. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like a home. 6 months later, I was sitting in a small, independent bookstore in Brooklyn. The room was packed. People were standing in the aisles, sitting on the floor, spilling out onto the sidewalk. They were here for the launch of my book, The Worth of Dignity, Urban Displacement, and the Human Cost of Progress. It was the uncensored version of my essay RCH, published by a small press that specialized in social justice literature. There were no sponsors, no gala dinners, no VIP tables. Just readers. Just people who CA read about the truth. The Mayor RCO was there, standing by the register, grinning like a proud father. Alistair Green was there, sitting in the front row, his eyes bright with pride. And David was there, too. He was standing at the back of the room, NEA the door. He wasn't in a suit. He was wearing a sweater and jeans, and he had a notebook in his hand. He was taking notes.
On my speech.
I stood up and walked to the podium. The room fell silent. I looked out at the faces, young and old, black and white, rich and poor. They were the faces of the city I had spent my life studying. They were the faces of the people who had inspired my work. I didn't have a prep-read speech. I didn't need one. Thank you for coming, I said simply. This book isn't mine. It belongs to the people who read their stories with me. It belongs to Mrs. Ramirez, who described eviction as a slow bleeding out. It belongs to the grandmother in Mott Haven who hid her grandchildren's toys so the inspectors wouldn't see them. It belongs to the teenager who slept on the subway so his mother could have the bed. Their stories were almost erased. They were almost turned into data points and percentages. But they fought back. By telling them, by writing them down, they fought back. I paused, letting the words settle. I was told I wasn't worthy to sit at a VIP table. I was told I belonged with the caterers and the drivers. And they were right, because the caterers and the drivers are the ones who keep the world running. They are the ones who know what real work looks like. They are the ones who deserve the front row seats. I looked at David. He was looking at me, his eyes shining. I gave him a slight nod. He nodded back. This book is not an hour RD, I continued. It's a reminder. A reminder that worthiness is not measured by the height of your heel or the weight of your wallet. It's measured by the depth of your empathy and the courage of your convictions. It's measured by the stories you choose to tell and the voices you choose to amplify. I picked up a copy of the book. I held it up. This is for them. This is for us. This is for the truth. The room erupted in applause. It wasn't polite clapping. It was thunderous, sustained, emotional. People were on their feet. They were cheering, whistling, crying. I stood there, accepting their applause, not for me, but for the work, for the truth. After the speech, I sat at a table and signed books. The line was long. People told me their stories. They thanked me. They shook my hand. They hugged me. It went on for hours. David stayed until the end. When the last person had left, he walked up to the table. He was holding a copy of the book. He placed it in front of me. Will you sign it? He asked. I looked at him. He looked healthier, stronger. The fear was gone from his eyes. Of course, I said. I opened the book to the title page. I picked up my pen. I wrote, to David, stories still matter. Keep writing yours. Love, Mom. I closed the book and handed it back to him. He took it, his hands trembling. Thank you, he whispered, for everything. You're welcome, I said. He turned and walked out of the bookstore. I watched him go, watching the door close behind him. And Marcio walked over and clapped me on the shoulder. Told you, he said. Legend. I smiled. Just a woman with a story, I said. And a son who finally remembered how to listen. We locked up the bookstore and walked out into the Brooklyn night. The air was cool, the stars were hidden by the city lights, but the sky was clear. I felt lighter than I had in Yaris. I had my work, I had my voice, and I had my son back. Not the man he had become, but the boy he had been. The boy who believed stories mattered. And that was worth more than any VIP table in the world. Chapter 10. The inheritance. 1 year after the gala, I was sitting in my apartment, grading papers for an online course I was teaching. It wasn't much, but it kept me busy. The book had sold well, not enough to make me rich, but enough to pay the bills and donate to the scholarship fund I had established for low-income sociology students. The fund was named after Mrs. Ramirez. David had moved to Portland. He was working as a junior editor for a small literary magazine. He wasn't making much money, but he was happy. He was writing again. Short stories, mostly. He sent them to me every month. They were good, raw, honest, full of the kind of detail that can only come from living a real life. I was proud of him. The Sterlings had faded from the public eye. Richa Road had stepped down from most of his BOA. RDS Victoria had filed for divorce. The Sterling Initiative had been formally discredited, and the AWA RD had been rescinded. The university had issued a formal apology to me and had revised its policies on RCH attribution. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was enough. Enough to restore my name. Enough to validate the work. Enough to send a message.
My phone rang.
It was David. I answered it.
"Hi, Mom," he said.
His voice was clear, strong. "I'm calling because I have some news." "What is it?" I asked, setting down my pen.
"I sold a story," he said.
"To a major journal. It's about a boy who lives in a CA or BOA road box but has a Libra re in his imagination. Sound familiar, R?" I closed my eyes. I could see the picture he had drawn all those years ago. The shelves filled with books. The pigeons that talked. "It sounds wonderful," I said. "It is," he said. "And Mom, I dedicated it to you. To the woman who taught me that stories are worth more than gold plaques." I felt a lump in my throat. I swallowed it down. "Thank you, David," I said.
"I'm honored." "No," he said.
"Thank you
for not giving up on me,
even when I gave up on myself." We talked for a while longer. He told me about his job, his estrangement, his plans for the future. He sounded like a man who had found his footing. He sounded like my son. After we hung up, I sat in the silence of my estrangement. The clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. I looked around the room. The books, the desk, the worn sofa. It was all still there. It was all still mine. I stood up and walked to the bookshelf. I pulled out a copy of The Worth of Dignity. I opened it to the dedication page. For the residents of Mott Haven, who taught me that home is not a building but a story. And below it, in my own handwriting, a note I had added later. And for David, who reminded me that the story isn't over until the last word is written. I closed the book and placed it back on the shelf. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The lights were coming on, dotting the darkness. Somewhere out there, David was writing. Somewhere out there, Mrs. Ramirez's grandchildren were growing up. Somewhere out there, the truth was still being told. I turned away from the window and went back to my desk. I picked up my pen. I had a class to teach tomorrow. I had papers to grade. I had a life to live. And for the first time in a very long time, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not at a VIP table. Not in the shadows. But right here. In the light of my own truth. I began to write. The words flowed. The story continued. And the inheritance, the real inheritance, was safe. It wasn't money. It wasn't status. It was the knowledge that I had lived an honest life. And that was worth more than anything Victoria Sterling could ever imagine. I finished grading the last paper. I closed my laptop. I turned off the lamp. And I went to bed, sleeping more peacefully than I had in years. The hiss was gone. The table was empty. And I was free.